Well, way back in the very beginningest days of my being a witch, I was just a little baby witch. And I had this other, not my wife, I hadn't even met my wife yet, I had this other girl who was working as kind of a sort of substitute priestess. And I bought her a set of what are called bigas, which is the word for the witch jewels. And it's like a special necklace and crown and all, and they're very sacred. Kind of like, it's sort of like a bargain basement version of the crown jewels in the Tower of London, if you will. And because every head of a coven is actually a queen. She's a witch queen. And anyhow, this girl had a friend who was not really a very good friend, and she came in and while the girl wasn't looking, she stole those things and pawned them, those jewels. They weren't even very expensive, but it was the idea that this girl stole something from the goddess. Well, because of this law of threefold return, within 24 hours, this young lady, who was only like 19 or 20 years old, fell down 2 flights of stairs, broke her back, and was paralyzed from the waist down, as far as I know to this day. That's not obviously a very good thing. We did numerous occasions, we did spells of healing. One time a lady in our coven, her husband was having a problem with his what they call erectile dysfunction, and we did a spell of love and it healed that. Again, there is real stuff happening here, but it's powered by the demonic.
Thanks.
It's not powered by,
And what might be the downside to those people? I mean, something good happened, but what's going to be the downside down the track?
Again, the devil never gives you anything without taking something greater away from you. That's the danger. And so the downside is that all these people got more faith in the gods of Wicca and less faith in the true God of the Bible. That's the main downside. They were more and more deeply deceived. Now, here's the funny thing. You should ask that. Without saying any names, this fellow who had the problem, once that spell was done, within about 1.5 years, he was running around cheating on his wife. His wife didn't know about it. And he ended up finally, and she was the sweetest young lady, and he finally ended up divorcing her and marrying some 17-year-old chick who was 10 years younger than his wife, kind of a typical. It was like he was having a midlife crisis and he wasn't even 29 years old. So that's an interesting illustration of how this kind of thing can backfire on you. He ended up with sort of a case of permanent priapism.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell us another story to show how the power of Jesus is greater than even all these other powers?
Well, when I had gone on, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, and several years after this time, I had gotten involved in Satanism. And I met a guy who was one of the highest-ranking Satanists in the whole Midwest, and he was teaching me. And an interesting thing happened. A guy, came and paid this fellow, I think it was $500 to kill his ex-wife by a magical curse. In other words, he put out a psychic hit on his ex-wife because he wanted custody of the kids. Not a very nice guy. And he paid us this money, and this fellow asked me to help out with a curse. And so we got out and we started doing curses. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. In fact, we'd send out these we even did what's called in voodoo a grand envoûtement, which is one of the great, most powerful curses you can level against someone. Nothing. The only thing that happened is that upon numerous occasions, these demonic forces we would send out against this woman would come back and beat the tar out of us. It was like they would come back and we'd get hit with horrible things, like asthma attacks and seizures and whatever. And later on, I found out that this guy that had made the contract, he was the son of a preacher, and his wife was a Christian. Now, obviously, this guy wasn't much of a Christian, but his wife was still walking with the Lord, and she was protected by the blood. And so everything we threw at her just bounced right back. Just no matter what we did, it just did not work. And of course, since we got saved, we've got so many people mad at us. We got the Mormons mad at us, the Masons mad at us, the witches mad at us, the Satanists mad at us. We've got so many people cursing us. We have to, keep a phone book full. And yet, 99% of this stuff never gets through because we're protected. It's kind of funny. The Hebrew word for blood is dome, and I tell people we're under the dome.
Great.
the force field that's around us that protects us by the power of the living God.
Great. What can you say about the light, since so many people think if there's a demon or a bad thing that they'll just send it to the light and that solves all problems?
Well, we were taught that as spiritualist mediums, because both my wife and I were ordained as spiritualist ministers and mediums. Oh, if you see a spirit coming, you just say, oh, do you stand in the light? Or like you say, if it's a bad, oh, I just send it to the light. Well, people forget that light is it's neutral. I mean, and Lucifer himself, the name means light bearer. He's called an angel of light in Paul's epistle to the Corinthians. So light in and of itself, there can be a false light. And that's the problem. I know when I went through the Luciferian initiation, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but it was like this searing, blinding light came into my brain, just like someone pouring molten lava into my mind. And it blinded me. I mean, even though I had my eyes closed, the light was so bright, it was like the incandescent light of 1,000 suns. And that was my illumination. That was my enlightenment with the light of Lucifer. So I had all the light you could possibly want. I felt like my brain had a suntan by the time we were done. But I knew nothing. I was in spiritual darkness. So sometimes, the illusion of light is actually the deepest sort of darkness. And it's much more efficacious to challenge an evil spirit in the name of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and command it to obey and to ask, do you serve the living God, Yahweh Elohim, King of the universe? And of course they have to say, no, I don't.
Okay.
And then you just send them on their merry way.
Do they have love in witchcraft?
Pardon me?
Love, is that?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, witches are there's an old wives' tale that says witches cannot love and they cannot cry, but that's not really true. Witches are just normal people. They're just as normal as Methodists and Baptists and Hare Krishnas and Buddhists. So they can love. They may not be able to have the kind of unselfish agape love that Christians have, but they can love. I love my wife very deeply. I love her a bazillion times more now. But, and I know many people who were, very much in love. But I will also tell you this, Wicca is very hard on marriages. We performed quite a few hand fastings, which is the name for a witch wedding, and had many people who were married even before they joined our covens, and not one of those marriages survived except ours. All of the rest of the marriages ended in divorce, which is much higher than the national average.
Right. You make the comment in one of your books that a lot of people go to Wicca because they're sick of organised religion. Does Wicca have any of the problems of organised religion?
Well, of course it does, because anytime you have people, you have problems. I mean, like the old joke about, I'm trying to find a perfect church, but if I found the perfect church and joined it, it wouldn't be perfect anymore because I'd be in it. There's no such thing as a perfect anything. But the difference is that Wicca has only Wicca has only been around in any kind of organized way for less than a century. So it hasn't had as much time or as much power to mess up the way the Christian church has down through the centuries. But yeah, there was backbiting, there was fighting, there was guys cheating on their wives, and in fact we had one guy who actually tried to shoot another guy in the coven because he found out the guy was cheating on his wife. I mean, it really, they have all the same problems, but just on a smaller scale, because of course there aren't coven by law can only be 13 members. So you can't have a church of 500 people. You can't have a coven of 500 people. But even in a microcosmic sense, there's still bickering and backbiting and betrayal and all the same problems. That's why many witches now are choosing to be what is called solitaires, which means they just practice entirely by themselves. And it's easy then because you have a church of one, and obviously you can get along and do whatever you want.
Right.
But that doesn't really solve the problem. The person is still lost. They're still on their way to hell.
So what's the history of Wicca? Because I imagine a lot of people think that it's an ancient religion.
Well, that's how it's billed. They call it Il Vecchio Religione, the old religion. But actually, even witches that are serious about their scholarship will admit that probably there was no such thing as the witch cult as it's now described prior to the early part of the 20th century. In fact, a lot of them will now say that probably Gerald Gardner, who was a retired British civil servant who basically made witchcraft popular in the 1950s. See, in Britain, up until 1951, it was a crime to say you were a witch. It came under the heading of being a scam artist.